Hey everyone, welcome to How It Is, the show where I talk about things that are, to say the least, slightly concerning, and then post them here on my YouTube channel. Yep. Also, according to YouTube analytics, only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are subscribed. So, if you just want to go down to the subscribe button and just, look at it, say, what's up? What's poppin'? Yo! I do, however, want to apologize for the hiatus. With everything currently happening right now, I didn't feel like it was right to talk about other things besides what was important then, like the coronavirus and the Black Lives Matter movement, which I am in total support of. I will be leaving a bunch of links in the description to a bunch of websites you can donate to, videos you can watch, and petitions you can sign in order to support the movement. Anyway, America's public transit system is not good. But seriously, why does America just eat shit when it comes to hold on, let me look up a synonym real quick. Federal movement. Well, today we're going to try and answer that question because the world is currently having a meltdown. And I mean a literal meltdown. So, it would be best to try and look for answers that would calm our little planet down so we don't have to build the Great Wall starring Matt Damon to protect us from rising sea levels. Let's go! Let's do some compare and contrast and use that thinking skill outside of the classroom. You're welcome, AP Social Studies Department. So let's say this. In order for people to start using public transit more frequently, we need to establish some things that will attract more people to use that service. Things like running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that each interval between arrival for each bus or train station is at or below 30 minutes. Taking that into consideration, let's look at the cities across the US that do have that kind of service. First up, Washington, D.C. Wow, pretty impressive. Okay. How about Portland? Okay, that's decent. It's not great, but it's still there. How about Columbus? Oh no. What's weird is that Toronto, Canada, which isn't even that different from any big city in the US, has way more riders per capita than any of the cities listed on this map. Unless you are going downtown or live there, public transit just isn't good. It's just better to use a car. What's even less appealing is that a lot of American buses stop their service at 7 p.m. and won't even run on Sundays. So we've discussed how public transit is bad, but now we need to discuss why public transit is bad. And there's multiple reasons as to why. One is political and one is rooted in terrible financial decisions over the course of a century. So let's start with the second one. At the tail end of the Industrial Revolution, trains were being used for a multitude of things, like transporting passengers all across the city, delivering freight, and imperializing Africa, which didn't work for the most part, but good try, Britain. I'm sure India will work out. In the US specifically, interurbans, these things, were massively expanded upon throughout many suburbs, which allowed transportation to and from the city. Unlike today, this system was used largely by middle-class citizens. Woo woo, it's the 1920s. World War I just ended, which is pretty good, pretty fun. However, at this time, transit companies were beginning to decline for a couple of reasons. The first being that transit companies would try to make money through real estate speculation, which was working, but didn't really in the long run. The second being a perception by people that the transit industry was run by a bunch of terrible businessmen. And the third being that the Great Depression was happening. Fast forward to the 1950s, middle-class suburbs, particularly white ones, were expanding greatly. These new suburbs, which lied outside of the main city, were built around the success and newfound affordability of the automobile. Whoa! Meanwhile, transit companies did next to nothing to combat this, contributing to more people having to buy cars just to go places. Now, although a lot of people contribute the blame for the downfall of our public transit industry to National City Lines, a company that tried to convert a bunch of streetcars into buses, this isn't the actual reason, according to this giant Bloomberg City Lab article I read. So, if I'm wrong, I didn't support Michael Bloomberg for president. Let me set the stage. public transit at that time wasn't that fast. I mean, the radius in which you could get to downtown in under an hour by train was way less than the radius in which you could by car. This meant that a bunch of people decided to switch to the automobile due to the shorter commute time. So transit systems had to regroup. Think of things that might help them get out of their sticky situation. The conversation probably went a little like this. Guys, look, we're eating shit. We're eating literal dog shit right now, so we gotta do something about it. Yeah, you're right. And so, like that historically accurate footage I just showed you, transit systems decided to cut back on service, which made more riders revert to cars, which led to more cutting back on service, which made more riders revert to cars, which led to more cutting back on service, which made more riders revert to cars. Something funny, however, is that public transportation that was either below ground or on raised platforms survived pretty well and are still running today. This was because they still continued to keep up service during the rise of the automobile, and they were time competitive since they didn't have to deal with stop signs, red lights, and traffic. Okay, so you know how public transportation is just not doing so great right now? Well, why don't we just kick it while it's down? The Interstate Highway Act, passed by Congress in 1956, promised 90% of federal transportation funds to go towards free high-speed roads. These roads sprawled out even further than any before, slashing commute times once again. So, you know what that means for public transportation? They did nothing to stop it, cutting back on service, which led to more riders revert to cars, which led to more cutting back on service, which led to more riders reverting to cars. To add on to that, private transit services were not even willing to go out to buttfuck nowhere to try and stay competitive. This resulted in a kind of invisible border between those who could afford cars and those who couldn't. Those who could lived in the suburbs, and those who couldn't lived in the city. And now, if you think it couldn't get any worse, you'd be right. Sort of. In 1964, the Urban Mass Transportation Act served as a response to some of the public's resistance towards expressways, or highways in italics. The leader for this attempt at modernizing our transit system was the aerospace industry, who came forward with ideas like automation, magnetic levitation, and big brain shit, like making the train tracks wider. What the fuck? In the 70s and 80s, cities like San Francisco, Atlanta, and Washington, D.C. began to build trains that would go out to these suburbs previously untouched by their local transit system. These trains usually would be running in the middle of highways, which now are pretty easy to spot when getting closer to a city with a pretty prevalent public transit system. However, the end product of these systems were totally different than what was originally promised in both the bill passed by Congress and the blueprints designed by the public transit systems themselves. First of all, a lot of these trains didn't even go out to the suburbs they promised, meaning that people still had to connect with the bus to get to and from their house. Secondly, yeah, you know those buses that I just mentioned? Yeah, turns out a lot of them actually aren't a part of the same agency as those trains, meaning that you would have to pay double fares and have a harder time coordinating your commute. And finally, because these train and bus stations weren't as widely dispersed as promised, they would have to build these big parking lots right in front of the stations. And the idea was that you would have to drive out to these parking lots, park your car, and then jump on the train or bus. What ended up happening was that a bunch of people decided to just drive to the city in one go instead of driving halfway there and then switching onto a bus or a train to go the second length, creating a longer commute. However, something is better than nothing, and a decent amount of people were actually able to get to and from the city in an affordable way. This system, though, only worked in cities with sprawling downtowns like San Francisco and Washington, D.C., but failed in places like Baltimore, Atlanta, and Miami. Also, because a lot of these companies were federally funded, they would have what's called a service meltdown, where maintenance would have to be prolonged because federal funding didn't come in soon enough, which resulted in service that just wasn't up to par. Hey, speaking of Miami in the 1980s, who wants to talk about Ronald Reagan? During Reagan's presidency, and really throughout the Cold War, the US really wanted to stick it to the Soviet Union by, flexing their capitalist muscles and really doubling down on the whole free market thing. Well, because Reagan was a huge supporter of this whole ideal and private enterprises as a whole, he thought it would be a pretty cool idea to condemn the $1 billion subsidy that was going to be given towards Miami's Metro Rail. He said he was going to do this due to the fact that Miami's Metro Rail was going to attract less than 10,000 daily riders. However, comma, what if I told you that those numbers weren't correct? To start us off, the $1 billion subsidy that Reagan condemned was actually under $800 million. The number of daily riders was over 15,000 at the end of 1984, and at the end of 1985, the year that Reagan gave this speech, the number was expected to be 75,000 daily riders. I mean, that kind of thinking of not checking the facts first and turning a blind eye towards things that might help the community is honestly a little expected. I mean, Reagan started as a Hollywood actor and didn't even get into politics until later in his life. Wait, you know that kind of sounds familiar. Oh, hey guys. However, something incredible was making its way through many cities across America. And no, it wasn't the increasing popularity of the Beach Boys' 1988 hit, Kokomo. I love that song so damn much. It was actually commuter rails, baby! Yeah! Highways in the late 80s were having a hard time finding space to expand because most of that land that they were trying to reach was already developed upon. So city planners turned to commuter rails. These commuter rails, however, would only run during the rush hour, which would make commuting faster. Although a lot of these commuter rails weren't within walking distance from a lot of homes, they were still a step in the right direction. Now, you thought commuter rails were tough shit? You don't know, babe. When you hold me and kiss me slowly, it's the sweetest thing. And now, for the moment you've all been waiting for, probably, I don't fucking know. Who's ready to talk about light rails, baby? Whoa, dude, is that a light rail? Yup.
Cool. Efficient. Light? I don't know.
In 1986, Portland, Oregon implemented its Max Light Rail system, which was praised for having beneficial factors like being lighter than normal subway cars, having more space than normal subway cars, and sharing room with the highways so that the cities didn't have to find more space. What was the true zinger though was their affordability. These guys only cost $15 to $100 million per mile to make, which isn't even that bad. The Max Light Rail system was a trendsetter across the US, with cities implementing their own light rail systems over the coming decades. But you know, this is too good to be true, since as you may know, most US citizens don't consistently ride light rails. Although there was a lot of federal funding, they simply just didn't have the resources to get these trains on a schedule tighter than half-hour intervals. What's more is that a lot of these light rail systems had very few connecting bus lines, which meant that very few people were within walking distance of a station. On top of that, they aren't really that fast, and although they had more seating than streetcars of the past, they still didn't have enough capacity to really influence people to make that change. So why is it that places like Toronto or Europe have thrived compared to us? Well, Toronto, despite being very similar to typical American cities and suburbs, chose to provide frequent bus services to those in the suburbs instead of just creating a parking lot outside of a train or a bus station. Europe, however, not being super similar to the way most American cities are structured, still chose to provide frequent bus service and even design neighborhoods to be at or around some sort of station. So what the hell happened to us? Why didn't we just, do that? Well, let me tell you. See, when we suburbanized, our neighborhoods were built with the car in mind, since the automobile was incredibly popular and continuing to grow. So, knowing this, urban planners designed suburbs to be sprawled out with huge sweeping roads, cul-de-sacs, and have every house be little boxes on the hillside, little boxes made of ticky-tackies. This trend of urban planning forced train and bus systems to spend more money to serve the same amount of people. That's why cities in the US with the best transit systems are ones with grid-like layouts like New York City, Chicago, and San Francisco. Okay, after that whole historical analysis, I wanted to see how my own city compared to everything I've read about and give my own thoughts about what it has to offer. So I asked my friend Pierce, who you guys may remember from this video, to tag along with me for two reasons. One, content. That's it. There's no second reason. So after driving for 20 minutes from my house, we finally got to the station. And can I just say, the fits? Immaculate. Pierce was rocking the white A&F long sleeve with the cuff black jeans and the black dress shoes. As for me, I wore some black jeans, some white cons, and a forest crewneck sweatshirt, which, unlike the trees in the state of Colorado, these trees were living. Anyway, Pierce and I purchased our tickets at the station, which went pretty smoothly. After that, we ran a fashion show.
Yo, What?
and kickstarted our comedy careers.
And training for this moment.
Yeah! But I guess the universe thought we were too powerful. So we were forced to board the midnight train that wasn't at midnight, nor was it going anywhere, and sit down for a 20-minute ride to the city. As the train started moving, I noticed that not a lot of people were riding the train. I mean, we literally had the car to ourselves, which was surprising because it was a Friday night, but not surprising because we are currently in a global pandemic. So basically, we went on what our city defined as a commuter rail, which is technically right because it is a heavier type of train that is overlooked by the Federal Railroad Administration, yet it was also run via electric cables and to my knowledge doesn't share any of the tracks with any other company. So to avoid confusion about what type of train this is, I'm going to be referring to this train as Travis Scott. Anywho, Travis Scott here goes about 89 miles an hour, which is pretty good for a commuter slash light slash Cactus Jack Delight train.
I'm Travis Scott. This is my McDonald's order.
Although its speed is good and its fares were well priced, the intervals in between stops were a bit of a disappointment. For both train and bus stations, Travis Scott included, times of arrival for that particular station ranged from 30 minutes to an hour. We were fortunate enough to live by a station which only had 30-minute intervals, but a lot of other stations and routes aren't that lucky. On top of that, every station that we came across on our route had a big parking lot sitting in front of it, in hopes of attracting more riders. And to its benefit, it actually somewhat did. For some of them. You see, as we got closer to the city, the stations began to just be near factories rather than residential areas. These stations in particular had 0 cars parked in the parking lot, as opposed to the few cars that were in the lot that I had parked my car in. Finally, we arrived in the city. Pierce and I walked around, talked about some deep shit, watched someone fail at riding a skateboard down a flight of stairs, and then returned home. Now we have reached the end of the history section, and this is intermission. Hi, I'm Miguel, and I'm your intermission boyo. Grab a snack, get a drink, go pee-pee, take a massive shit, do whatever you need, baby. Now you might be asking yourself, Miguel, was this little bit of the video used to act as a transition from one part of the video to the next?
Take a look who's coming down the track. Make waves and shapes, hooray for shapes.
Now, of course, there isn't any direct reason as to why public transportation is bad, but I do, however, want to try and go over the reasons as to why it's bad now and why we haven't seen any improvement. Anyway, public transportation is pretty controversial. I mean, who knew? Who knew? Now, a reason for a lot of this dividedness is because a lot of people, and I'm not gonna say who, sees public transportation as a form of welfare. I mean, ever since the automobile was made standard and the Thomas the Tank Engine series went to shit.
Hello, Percy. I didn't see you there. You put that garland back. Make me.
The mentality surrounding public transportation has been that it's just government aid for people who can't afford cars. And now what sucks is that this mentality has started to make this our reality. Hi, I'm Lin-Manuel Miranda, and you're watching Disney Channel. So, when you treat public transportation as welfare, you're basically forced to charge cheap fares, which in turn don't allow you to provide efficient service to your clients. And that right there is why you don't get 24/7 service, why you have long intervals between arrivals, and why you have service meltdowns. Maybe if we charged higher fares, we could get that efficient service and potentially new routes that would attract people to try and alter their commute and how they travel overall. But that aside, public transportation as of right now is still kind of a form of welfare. But is that a bad thing? An incredible YouTuber by the name of Wendover Productions, who, if you haven't yet, I highly encourage you to go check him out. He's such an incredible YouTuber. We stan Wendover Productions here at youtube.com/Miguel Castillo. That's not my actual URL. But anyway, Mr. Productions over here has done a lot of videos about trains and public transportation as a whole. In fact, in his video, Why Public Transportation Sucks, he talked about this.
But here's the most important sentence of this entire video. Access to transportation is the single most important factor in an individual's ability to escape poverty. That is not a subjective claim, that is a fact that emerged from a Harvard study. Someone who lives right by a subway stop is astronomically more likely to find a high-paying job than someone who doesn't have a way to get around. Individuals in poverty generally live in poor neighborhoods with few job opportunities, but with reliable, accessible, and inexpensive public transportation, these individuals can get all across their city to where the jobs are.
Public transportation, without a doubt, benefits the economy immensely by providing ways in which people who may not have been able to get to a job that was out of their commute range can now apply to. However, if we still need to charge higher fares, there are other ways in which we can while also providing lower fares to people with lower incomes. Seattle, for example, has actually experimented with charging people with lower incomes lower fares. But if we wanted to keep lower fares, in France, for example, every municipality is legally required to pay the difference between the operating costs and the fares of their own public transportation. Another reason as to why public transportation is not good is because of the manipulation of wealthy businessmen who have a stake in or own fossil fuel companies, or more specifically, the Koch brothers. These two fine young gentlemen, and yes, I'm aware of the picture I'm showing, are right-wing billionaires who are so very pro-fossil fuel industry. These two have enormous stakes in fossil fuel corporations, as well as stakes in companies who produce things like asphalt tires and seatbelts. They also have spent millions of dollars funding an organization called Americans for Prosperity, who I'm just going to read a little bit of their homepage and let you interpret what kind of ideals they stand for. Americans for Prosperity engages in broad-based, grassroots outreach to advocate long-term solutions to the country's biggest problems that prevent people from realizing their incredible potential: unsustainable government spending and debt, a broken immigration system, a rigged economy, and a host of other issues you can explore. American for Prosperity activists engage friends and neighbors on key issues and encourage them to take an active role in advancing a free and open society where every person can realize their American dream. They literally said nothing in two very long sentences. Aside from the AFP stuff, a lot of the information that I'm getting on the Koch brothers is actually coming from one of my favorite comedians, as well as one of the people who inspired me to make How It Is, Hassan Minhaj. In his Patriot Act episode, Why Your Public Transportation Sucks, he talked about how Nashville was going to implement a new public rail and bus system until this happened.
AFP activists organized a door-to-door canvassing campaign against the new rail and bus lines. They told voters it was too expensive and would raise taxes, and it worked, flipping public opinion from almost 60% for the transit plan to more than 60% against it. AFP targets local voters, and then they flip them with misleading campaigns, and it all looks like grassroots opposition, but it's actually mayonnaise billionaire bullshit. They have done this in at least 10 other states around the country.
Billionaires like the Kochs will stop at nothing to make sure that they are turning a profit. And sure, people can try and defend them by saying that public rail and bus lines cost more than roads in the short term, which is true. However, about 4,000 more jobs are created in public transit rather than in highways, and that public transportation, in the long run, is way more beneficial towards the economy on both the federal and state level than highways could ever be. Finally, the last big reason as to why America's public transportation system is pretty incompetent is due to one of America's biggest societal problems stemming from 1619, that being racism. Because, you know, America. Oh no. So a lot of people in the United States often associate public transit with the city, since, as you can see right now, I am in the suburbs, and there are absolutely no bus or train stations within walking distance, unless you're one of those cross-country kids that likes running 7.5 miles a day, because the closest bus station to my house is 7.5 miles away. But what I'm getting at here is that we associate cities with public transit, and cities usually have higher populations of minorities as well as people living in poverty. So for a lot of wealthy white people, they'll think that public transit is just a form of transportation for minorities or the poor. That's why governments will call spending on roads and interstates investment or necessary infrastructure for growth, whereas they'll call spending on urban areas bailouts or welfare. It's like it's all coming full circle now, guys. I'm starting to get the idea of the video. For public transit spending, they'll isolate it into two different groups: dependent and choice, with dependent consisting of mostly black people and choice consisting of mostly white people. For the dependent group of people, cities knew that they didn't have to do a whole lot to keep clients coming. So cities would just spend the bare minimum on service, comfort, and overall experience. Meanwhile, for the areas where most people fall into the choice category, cities knew that they had to spend a lot more on service in order to attract people away from the automobile. So, to entice more riders, cities would redo or make entirely new train and bus routes that were quick, extremely comfortable, and reliable. For instance, Denver's busiest transit route in the city serves on average 22,000 daily riders. This route covers 10.5 miles, and of those 10.5 miles, the most populous part encompasses 125,000 people. About 52% of the people living near this route are white. By contrast, this suburban route that runs 8.7 miles only transports 8,000 riders per day. The most populous part of that route only houses 9,932 people. And by no surprise, this area is about 73% white. Also, I think I forgot to mention that this transit route in the suburbs is this nice, luxurious, expensive light rail network where they have nice little canopies to wait under, plenty of bench space, and the new Maroon 5 song where Adam Levine panders to an oppressed group of people to get radio play. Whereas the busier route is only a bus system that's mixed in with traffic, and the only benefit that you get while riding it is that you get a free complimentary train album, which is only there to remind you about where you aren't. Aw, you gonna cry, you little baby, you gonna piss me because you can't listen to the new Maroon 5 song? Aw, I didn't think so. Another thing white people complain about is that the train has too many sketchy people on it. So, to combat this and still keep the business of those choice riders, cities will make different routes for choice and dependent, as well as skip stations that are near impoverished or racially diverse areas. The Bay Area Rapid Transit, or BART, runs through the San Antonio neighborhood in Oakland, the most racially diverse part of the city. In this neighborhood, trains run about 3 miles before reaching a stop, whereas in Walnut Creek, which is half as populated, runs about 1.75 miles before reaching a stop. Despite many transit companies deciding to skip stations on purpose due to drug addicts, crooks, and thieves, even though there was no spike in crime due to the installation of a train station in a racially diverse area, choice riders still didn't feel safe enough. So, without a moment's hesitation, loads of agencies started putting police on trains. They did this without even considering the fact that a lot of train and bus drivers are actually trained to de-escalate problems with disorderly riders, or implementing unarmed fare enforcement officers. In 2019, New York City had record low crime levels, yet still decided to put 500 more police officers on subways, even though there were already 2,500 on duty. Back to the BART, only 12% of riders are black, yet somehow 50% of the citations issued by the BART police are given to black people. And I haven't even talked about how some transit agencies will literally exclude the main city from their transit route due to a more racially diverse population, but I think you guys get the gist of what I'm saying here. The result of public transportation having to accommodate to a racist society has in turn created a racist system. Now, of course, the biggest gripe that a lot of people have with public transportation is money. If we raised taxes a small amount or reallocated some funds that were going towards roads and highways and put them into public transportation, our system would be so much better than what it is right now. And let's not forget that we can even put some of that money into high-speed rail, which has proven wonders in Europe, Asia, and even Africa. In fact, some high-speed rail projects are being developed in America right now. Up until early 2019, development on a high-speed rail network stretching from San Francisco to Los Angeles was actually being built until costs and political opposition stepped in the way. This then led to a $929 million loan granted by the Obama administration to be canceled by not the Obama administration. And I'm just gonna let you connect the dots on that one. And what's worse is that the US Transportation Department is seeking every legal action to try and get California to give back the $2.5 billion they've already received for this project. However, California has decided that they're going to try and work on a smaller part of that line that they were already working on and finish that. Surprisingly, the state of Texas is making headway into the high-speed rail industry. Texas Central, a high-speed rail project, is planning to run from Houston to Dallas all in about 90 minutes, whereas it would usually take 4.5 hours by car. But let's say you're scared of the funding that has to be provided in order to get this train up and running. Well, this whole project is actually being privately funded by investors. Although this train is on track to be the first legitimate high-speed rail system in the country, this, along with what happened in California, kind of demonstrates that it may be near impossible to try and get a high-speed rail network publicly funded. But nonetheless, I highly encourage you go check out their website because they could be a trendsetter in the world of high-speed rail in the United States. Another way to fix this problem that might be a little hard to do but still doable would be to raise gas prices. Think of it like this. If gas prices go up, people will become less inclined to drive, impelling them to make better use of their public transit. Something like London's low emission zones, where people are charged a certain amount of money for driving in a specified area in order to lower pollution in traffic, could influence more people to start riding the train or bus more. Finally, as for what we can do as individuals, it isn't a whole lot. Using public transportation more is great, but fares only amount to about 26% of its funding. Now, of course, you could argue that if we just used it more, it would boost their budget, which is true, but it wouldn't make that big of an impact in order to create better service. So really the only way we can help, and I cannot stress this enough, is to vote. Vote on the federal level, vote on the state level, vote on the local level, vote in your school student council election in hopes of getting a decent junior body president. But because student council elections are just mini popularity contests, the kid who was actually going to benefit the school didn't win because the most popular kid in school won. And he's also kind of a dick because he made fun of you in AP Human Geography whenever he got a better test grade than you. So you've kind of resented him since freshman year, but this is not a personal example. But anyway, voting for officials that will advocate for better public transit, advocate for better fares, focus that funding towards operational costs, and develop fair placement of those transit routes could be game-changing. Unlike many first world countries in this world, we do not treat public transit as an essential part of our society. But now, more than ever, we have to, because if we don't stand up and fight for energy-efficient, zero-emission transportation, we will resent that choice as we watch our world slowly increase in temperature, changing our planet as we know it. And that's how it is. And no, I'm not making the same joke I made last episode. Get it because that's the name of the show. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. This video took me so damn long to make, so I really hope you guys enjoyed it. If you guys wouldn't mind, please subscribe or like or do whatever you need to do. Comment down below what kind of how it is video topics you want me to cover, because current events are hard and I need help. That's it. Bye.